It's Emil. It's Emil Guillermo. Emil, Amok to you. I know we're coming at this weird time. We're doing it live because when we do it, we just do it live. It's a surprise. This is my takeout, Emil Amok's takeout. My takes on all things considerable, and of course, we've got a considerable thing going on. It's almost so considerable. Everyone's sort of lowballing it, low keying it, because it is so important, right? The two superpowers. I mean, you're not really counting Russia, right? The two superpowers here, one sort of doing well, but not. I mean, if you ask people if the United States is doing well, even here domestically, and most people say, oh, no, it's terrible. But compared to China, I mean, if you were to look at Greg Ip's column yesterday in the front page of the Wall Street Journal, actually today's Wall Street Journal, in 2021, Chinese President Xi Jinping popularized a slogan signifying China's expected displacement of the U.S. as the world's leading economic power. The East is rising, he said. The West is declining. China that year had suppressed the COVID-19 pandemic and went on to record its fastest growth in a decade, while the U.S. struggled. Now on the eve of a virtual meeting with President Biden he says on the eve of the virtual meeting with President Biden at the Asia Pacific Summit that fall, she was formally enshrined as China's most powerful leader in a generation. Biden still labored under the shadow of his predecessor's failed attempt to stay in office. And then a lot's happened in a year, right? A lot's happened in since that time, and a lot's happened in a year when the two of them last met. And chief among them is that the economy is in a shambles. That you have real estate's a mess in China right now. You got unmanageable local government debts. You got slumping confidence. You got deflation bordering on stagflation. You got, and here in the U.S., like I said, we have the news that inflation was going down. The markets went crazy yesterday. And that was a big story. Inflation cools, market soars. That was the front page of the Wall Street Journal, which was top of the fold. And so things are in flux. I'm not saying that President Xi is coming here as a pauper, but he's kind of in trouble. And he comes to the United States looking for opportunity, right? And the United States is trying to show the world, not just Xi, but show the world that it's the leader. It can do these kind of meetings. It can look enemies in the eye and talk. And in doing so, by being adult, we can preserve a peace, preserve a kind of coexistence. It means we can both the United States and China be prosperous. We need each other. You look at the number of people who the Chinese have interests here in the United States, businesses, real estate. I mean, we're kind of intertwined. And then you look at our populations, and no one mentions this. This is sort of like I guess it's sort of taken for granted, but not. This is why when I talk about it here on this show, we have an Asian Pacific American focus. And whatever happens in the ancestral home, usually because of xenophobia, because of just downright racism, Americans who are of Asian descent get caught in the middle. That's just the way it is. And so, you got to take all these things all together, and the news is just reporting, well, there's this economic thing going on, right? China is coming here, and they're having a big dinner. If you want a seat at the table with President Xi, it's going to cost you $40,000, and companies are lining up, and the Republicans don't like that because the Republicans are trying to paint China and President Xi as, oh, they're the villains, right? And of course, Asian Americans, because it doesn't matter if you're from China or not, because to people who are xenophobic, any Asian is considered Chinese. That's just the way it is. During the whole China flu pandemic, the fear, the Stop AAPI Hate, era, where the numbers of anti-Asian hate were going through the roof because of the fear that was perpetrated by the then president, who wants to be president again. He called it the China pandemic, the China flu, the China virus. Did people discriminate between Chinese and Filipinos and Japanese and any other kind of Asian? No, they didn't. So Asian American communities, 26 million strong here in the United States, we're looking at APEC and saying, okay, we want to make sure that everyone acts adult and there's peace, and because we have a mutual interest. All that despite the fact that each country has nukes pointing at the other, each country has spies, in each other's country. There's a mutual distrust that we operate under. And if anything goes wrong, the fallout is going to be felt mostly by Asian American communities, because people will react. I'm talking about non-Asians. They'll react to what's happening. They'll see Asian Americans and they'll say, who are you? Right? What country are you from? I'm from America. That's why this is important. And sometimes we just have to, understand that or remind ourselves of that. Hard to say we have to remind ourselves, because I think we're reminded every day of the racism that exists still in this country. I mean, that AP NORC survey, among the other questions. I mean, it's true that AAPI hate, instances of hate have gone down, but you ask Asian Americans if racism is still felt. That was one of the questions they asked. And yeah, people still feel racism. They still feel othered. It's still a thing. And, that's true whether your family came here 5 generations ago or 5 months ago. So we're in, this is a unique day when the president of China comes here to meet with Biden. It's so different from when they last met a year ago. So different when, Xi said these words in 2021. He said, the East is rising, the West is declining. Well, it's not so easy for China right now. And he's really coming here like any other immigrant, looking for opportunity. That's why he's going to have that big dinner with companies that are paying up to $40,000 a head. It's no mistake that Xi and Biden are meeting at Filoli, the estate down there in Woodside, kind of the bedroom of the tech community. And that they're looking for investors, partners. They're looking for ways to enhance and grow their economy. And I just think that the media is so downplaying what can come out of this, because things are kind of icy between China and the U.S. ever since that balloon, right? Back in February, it was just February this year. I thought it was like last year, but it was one of those cold, wintry kind of late winter type of months. So yeah, it was February, and a lot of distrust. And then, of course, Nancy Pelosi. I love Nancy, and I think this is an issue. She goes there to assure Taiwan that the United States will back them up, and that China couldn't handle that. That kind of hurt relations. Just the other day, there was some conflict in the South China Seas, aka the West Philippine Sea, islands that China says they own, the Spratlys and some other islands in that area. The Filipinos say it's ours, and the Filipinos are our allies. So we're going to have, if the things that they say could come out of these meetings come true, open communications, that's sort of the biggest. If we have that, then we can avoid a mistake causing an international incident. And then there's some other things that can happen, like there's talk about how the different component parts that make up fentanyl, they come out of China, they end up in Mexico, they come into the U.S., they become a huge problem here. If China can do something about controlling those substances, that could be something that would be beneficial to everyone. And then there's the economic things that China is looking for that might benefit both China and the U.S. So, it's not as low level a meeting as people think. It's still important. But they're downplaying it. They're saying, when they come out of this, there's not going to be a joint statement of, hey, we are in agreement on X, Y, or Z. So it's unlikely we'll see anything on climate change, nothing big at least. Everyone is going to have their own little separate remarks that they'll deliver to the country, to their media. Besides all the officials that are there at APEC, you've got all the media giving information to their peoples. What the Chinese media say to the Chinese, what the American media says to the Americans, sometimes very different. Very different. And that's why you have all these different audiences. And where's the Asian American audience in this? The Asian American audience has to sort of put two and two together and say, okay, our interest is in wanting China and the U.S. to get along, because if there's any kind of dissonance, the Asian American community usually pays the price. That's what we're trying to avoid. So we want smooth relations, because smooth relations will mean we won't see people trying to take it out on Asian Americans, Chinese Americans, because that's what usually happens. And already we're seeing some rumblings in Congress about, well, who are these companies paying $40,000 to have dinner with President Xi? Why are they doing that? Because the Republicans are out to isolate and make China into the boogeyman, despite the fact that a lot of the capitalists who are generally Republican are paying $40,000 to meet and open up the markets to China or to do business with China. So it's complicated, right? A lot of contradictions, but this is the way it is. So I thought maybe I'd play a little bit of what was said at that first meeting down at Filoli in Woodside. They were gathered together just before lunch, around 11:30, 11:45. They were all gathered at a table. They had their translation headphones on, and this is Biden talking. This is Biden talking about how they last met a year ago.
This time of year, about a year and a day ago, we met in Bali on the sidelines of the G20. Since then, key members of our teams have had important discussions on issues mattering to both our nations and to the world. But as always, there is no substitute to face-to-face discussions.
See, you wonder, could they have Zoomed? See, no, they a Zoom meeting would have made it, right? They had to be there in person.
I've always found our discussions straightforward and frank, and I've always appreciated them. Mr. President, we know each other for a long time. We haven't always agreed, which was not a surprise to anyone, but our meetings have always been candid, straightforward, and useful. Never doubted what you've told me in terms of your candid in which you speak.
See, and that's kind of important. Hey, look, we don't always see eye to eye, but our meetings have always been candid, straightforward, and useful. If that's what can come out of these meetings, some kind of usefulness, I think going in, that's a positive. That's a positive sign.
I value our conversation because I think it's paramount that you and I understand each other clearly, leader to leader, with no misconception. We have to ensure that competition does not veer into conflict.
Competition does not veer into conflict. Now that's pretty important, right? We're two leaders. We're meeting. There's no misconceptions. This is the way adults act, right? I don't know if there was another guy in there. I mean, maybe it depends on the speechwriters. But if the previous president was there, I mean, the previous president just sucked up to Xi in Mar-a-Lago when Xi was there. This president has a more adult way of trying to, if you can talk to a competitor, if you can talk to someone who you respect but may not like and may not agree with, that's a leader.
And we also have to manage it responsibly. Competition. That's what the United States want and what we intend to do. I also believe it's a world wants for both of us. Candid exchange. We also have a responsibility to our people and the work in the world to work together when we see it in our interest to do so.
So he's saying, look, we have a responsibility to not just to each other, but to our people and to the world. So now it's a solemn thing. The stakes are high. This is the opening remarks of President Biden to Xi and his group at Filoli in the dining room. I guess they're going to have lunch, about to have lunch. But it sets a tone for the meetings that are about to happen.
And a critical global challenge that we face, from climate change to counter-narcotics to artificial intelligence, demand our joint efforts. So I look forward to beginning this discussion.
That's Biden. I think it's key. He says, I value our conversation. We have to manage responsibly competition as with the United States. It's responsible to our people, responsible to the world. I think that's what you need to know. So, in a way, if there's no news coming out of this, it's news that they talk. You've heard that. People say it's news that they're meeting. That's great. So that was Biden, and this was Xi.
Mr. President, good morning. Coming here, I think of your trip to China when I was the vice president of China. We had a meeting. It was 12 years ago. I still remember our interactions very vividly, and it always gives me a lot of thoughts. Last time we met in Bali, you said it was a year and a day ago. A lot has happened since then. The world has emerged from the COVID pandemic, but is still under its tremendous impacts.
So you have, the translator there, a female, speaking for Xi, and it's starts out saying, look, I remember everything vividly that, when we met when I was vice president. These face-to-face meetings are important. I think that's the takeaway there.
The global economy is recovering, but its momentum remains sluggish. Industrial and supply chains are still under the threat of interruption, and protectionism is rising. All these are grave problems. The China-US relationship, which is the most important bilateral relationship in the world, should be perceived and envisioned in a broad context of the accelerating global transformations unseen in a century. It should develop in a way that benefits our two peoples and fulfills our responsibility for human progress. China-US relationship has never been smooth sailing over the past 50 years or more, and it always faces problems of one kind or another. Yet it has kept moving forward amid twists and turns. For two large countries like China and the United States, turning their back on each other is not an option.
Well, turning our back on each other is not an option. And so he also acknowledges, hey, it hasn't been the best. It's almost a model for how you would deal with someone who you've had a disagreement with, to the point of, fighting, to the point of being estranged. Instead of holding grudges and staying isolated and apart, you learn how to talk to each other. Notice no one has mentioned, and that balloon that we shot down. Or no one's mentioned anything about, when there was that racism toward, no one has mentioned any of that. You're trying to carve out something new, productive, and these are both adults. No time for childish antics, no time for being less than, no time for a kind of macho masculinity thing. It's time to work. This is the hard work of face-to-face diplomatic relations with another, leader to leader. I mean, that's what you see when you hear this opening exchange.
It is unrealistic for one side to remodel the other, and conflict and confrontation has unbearable consequences for both sides.
They realize that. Unbearable consequences. So you think maybe they want to open up that military communications, that it was suspended? I think it was suspended when Nancy Pelosi went there and said that, hey, if something happens to Taiwan, the United States would respond. I think that would, hearing Xi say that conflict and confrontation has unbearable consequences for both sides. I think it sounds like there's a willingness to open up those communication gates, to let that communication flow so that there's no misunderstanding. That's important.
I'm still of the view that major country competition is not the prevailing trend of current times and cannot solve the problems facing China and the United States or the world at large. Planet Earth is big enough for the two countries to succeed, and one country's success is an opportunity for the other.
Now that's a good phrase. Planet Earth is big enough for the two countries to succeed. It should be, right? Once again, showing a willingness. Of course, as I said earlier, the economy is not so great in China right now. And they're looking for opportunity. What's going to help them with their real estate market? What's going to help them with their economy and deflation? What's going to help them, just pick to right the ship there? That's a big ship to right. But it said with a way, you listen to what Biden said, and you listen to what Xi said here, there's a pathway to work together.
It is an objective fact that China and the United States are different in history, culture, social system, and development path. However, as long as they respect each other, coexist in peace, and pursue win-win cooperation, they will be fully capable of rising above differences and find the right way for the two major countries to get along with each other.
See, now there's a willingness. And then when you also realize that there are about 6-7 million Chinese among the 26 million Asian Americans, you see that Chinese Americans are a real part of America, and you see that Chinese nationals own businesses, own companies, own real estate here in the United States. You see how deeply intertwined we are. It's not just China's the mothership, and they are separate, but we have these joined interests. And Xi has a relationship with Americans going back to his days in college when he went to school in Iowa. Can you imagine that? Maybe all the good Chinese restaurants in Iowa are because of Xi as a student there. But this is the thing. The Chinese, they've been in the United States since the late 19th century. Well, that's when they were excluded. They were here a little earlier in the 19th century. But the Chinese have always been an issue, and now we see the 21st century Chinese issue is, how do we all work together? I think that's progress. That's the way it is in a global world. And you try to isolate them and say they're the enemy, that's going backwards. That's not progressive. That's not working toward a collaborative kind of modernization of relations, working together peacefully. More Xi here.
I firmly believe in the promising future of the bilateral relationship. Mr. President, you and I, we are at the helm of China-U.S. relations. We shoulder heavy responsibilities for the two peoples, for the world, and for history. I look forward to having an in-depth exchange of views and reaching new understandings with you on strategic and overarching issues critical to the direction of China-U.S. relations and on major issues affecting world peace and development.
Affecting world peace and development. I'd say, it's scripted somewhat, right? But these are the opening remarks of both Xi and Biden down there in Filoli. And people say, don't expect much out of these meetings, don't expect much news. But I think what you're seeing is a willingness on both sides to work together. And that's something you couldn't say a year ago. And I think if we want to keep the peace worldwide, it's helpful to have the other world leader on your side. You'll recall that, China and Putin were meeting soon after the Israel-Hamas thing blew up. I just think that shows you how complicated things can be with the different flashpoints on the world stage. Ukraine, you got the Middle East. The reports say that the United States is going to look to China to try to put pressure on Iran to act responsibly and toward peace. I mean, this is where the diplomacy and the arm twisting comes in. No one does anything that they will later regret if they work together and they know that it means mutual prosperity, mutual survival. I mean, these are the concepts at play. And right now, the United States would appear to have the upper hand because the economy is much better here than it is in China. So, played a little bit of, all the opening remarks of Xi, all the opening remarks of Biden. Presumably, they had lunch there at that table, and then they went off because it was around lunchtime. And then now they'll have like a three hours of meetings that should be ending in an hour or so. Is that enough? It's a start. It's a start. But as I said, it's important to Asian Americans because if something goes wrong, we'll be caught in the middle. So just thought I'd share those things. I saw that this morning. If you missed it, some of my comments, I'll write some things on my columns that appear on the ALDEF blog, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. I like to turn to Axios for news and information. I like that smart brevity bit. And they did not put the Biden-Xi start of that 4 hour, they did not put that at the lead. It was the second story. What was the first story? The first story was surprise news powerhouse. And this is sort of related because if you know something about where this surprise news powerhouse is located, you'll see it is kind of related. The surprise news powerhouse is TikTok, according to Axios. The share of TikTok users who consume news through the platform has nearly doubled since 2020. News organizations, business leaders, and brands are being forced to evolve and meet audiences where they are in order to break through. Roughly 1/3 of adults under 30 regularly scroll TikTok for news. 1/3 of adults under 30. And that's a 255% increase since 2020. If you want to reach those young millennials, I guess they would be considered young millennials, old Gen Zs. That's where they are, 1/3. They speak and talk on TikTok. TikTok's news consumption increase is taking place across all age demographics, not just younger Americans. That's kind of the real headline. It's not just those young people. The young people lead the way. Roughly half of Americans say they get some news from social media platforms, which if you are one of the, in my day, when I worked my way up the media, through the traditional media, there were just 3 networks. Radio, TV, there was ABC, NBC, CBS, and all platforms. And there were like 2, television and radio. That was it. That was much harder to break through. Now, you got social media galore, and here I am talking to you on social media. News audiences are increasing the most on TikTok and Instagram. Platforms like LinkedIn, Twitch, and Nextdoor are also gaining traction as news sources. Notice that's not true in terms of traction for Reddit, Facebook, or X, formerly known as Twitter. Let's see, they've got a graph here, but it looks like on the rise, LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram. And in decline, Reddit, Facebook, and Twitter, which is sad since I like Facebook, not so much on Reddit. Twitter I use, but if you haven't yet dusted off your LinkedIn account and said, okay, this is where I got to use LinkedIn, up 17%, or it's gone from 15 to 17%. TikTok from 22 to 43%. Instagram from 28 to 34%. So those were the big increases. And then down by 4% Reddit, down by a good 11% Facebook, and down by about 6% Twitter. So the big increases by TikTok leading the way. Women make up a greater portion of regular news consumers on TikTok, Nextdoor, Facebook, and Instagram. Men are more likely to opt for platforms like Reddit, X, and YouTube. The Pew study, this is based on a Pew study, shows that news consumers have accelerated their shift toward digital channels in the past year. Americans are roughly twice as likely to say they prefer getting news on digital devices, 58%, than television, 27%. Oh my God. They'd rather get their news on these things, digital devices, and not on TV. The revenge of the apps, right? Audience preference for radio and print media remains roughly stagnant at 6% and 5% respectively. This is how you consume your news. You consume it right here. Well, maybe I should go to TikTok. That's where the people are. All right. Emil here. Oh, I got to go. Emil Guillermo here. Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific live. We went on a little early here. I'd like to end with a little meditation. Oh, catch us on YouTube at Emil Amok 1, Facebook, fb.com/EmilGuillermo.media, Twitter, X at Emil Amok. And I guess I'll have to fire up my TikTok account. I'm on TikTok. You can find me there. I don't post much there, but I'm there. I'm also on Instagram. I don't post much there either. All right. We like to end with a little meditation. And so, as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. And may you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Emil Guillermo here. Till next time. Mahal Kita.